Welcome, Dr. Olivia Johnson. Thank you so much for showing up today. I just want to acknowledge you before you introduce yourself that you have been supporting the whole AWARE initiative for over 2 years. You have shown up on so many of our podcasts, and you have something to say today, specifically about what we've been looking to initiate how to care for mental health crisis, specifically of a spiritual nature, with first responders and pretty much with anybody else that interacts. So why don't you first start with introducing yourself, and then I have two or three questions from your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Janet. So, my name is Dr. Olivia Johnson. I am the founder of the Blue Wall Institute, one of the companies that I run, and my new company, which I'm pretty excited about, which is Cop to Corporate. I'm a former first responder and military veteran, and I've been working for the past 15 years in the area of suicide, and we call it now inoculation, but it's research regarding first responder wellness, suicide prevention, and other type of issues that affect our first responders.
And you're the real deal. Again, you've spoken on many of our webinars, especially when it came to what is 988? How do we include clergy in 988? How do we care for the spiritual and religious part of mental health? So that's kind of our focus in this short video. Let's start with, I just want everybody to know you are the first um, you are the first sponsor of Aware, and you just went right into helping us with logos, promoting us across the United States with first responders. Dr. Chatlos and I did quite a few orientations, so I just want to say thank you, thank you. You also started to introduce some very simple models that we can offer first responders, the clients that are going through this, et cetera. Let's start off with a general thought. Why did you even jump in on this to help us, to partner with us a few years ago on we want to include clergy, spiritual part of mental health. Why did you even jump in on that when 988 first started?
Well, I believe, we have a lot of mental health issues and we have a lot of people in crisis, regardless of why they're in a crisis, right? And I don't feel that they're getting the proper attention. And I don't think that, people know what to do. And that's part of the problem is when you don't know what to do, you do nothing or you do stuff that's going to be working in the opposite direction of what we need. And I just felt like what you were doing had a lot of legitimacy. And I felt like, even if people weren't having spiritual emergencies, they're having emergencies and they need to be handled somewhat the same so that we're not doing more damage. And I truly believe that it can be done. And we've talked about this before. Simply, we make things too difficult. When you have an acronym that's 10, 10 letters long, it's really difficult to remember that in a time of crisis. You've got to make things simple so people understand and they can use it when they're, in crisis or by themselves.
Yes. And we literally have at least two different simple things. I know we're going to have more, but you introduced the help model. And I think I could put it up on screen, but I'll just put it in front of you. The help model is about humbling ourselves, empathizing, listening, and patience. That applies to pretty much any situation in life.
Yes.
Um, how do you, like, again, your brilliance is in the simplicity. How can this visual help almost anybody that's in crisis?
Well, and that first one is humble ourselves. We oftentimes, as first responders, especially, and I love my first responders, but oftentimes when you get a call to assist somebody or do something, you may not get the accurate description of what's happening initially. And there can be a fear associated with that. Well, we'll talk about the fear piece in a little bit, but there's a piece that of the unknown, and that's the scary piece, right? You don't know what to expect. You don't know how to deal with somebody. So when we humble ourselves, you're going in there where you don't have to de-escalate a situation because you're not escalating in the first place. Right? You go in there and you just humble yourself and you listen to that. Now, of course, safety comes in as paramount, right? Making sure that it's safe. But the idea is to when you humble yourself to other people, you allow them to feel like the person that's, in the center of this right now, and they're getting the assistance that they need. It's not about us, it's not about our egos. It's not about this person is dangerous. As long as the scene is safe, they're not dangerous. We just don't understand what's happening with them right now. And maybe they don't understand what's happening either. It's a really scary place to be. So when you humble yourselves, you're also being gentle, you're being compassionate, and you're being mindful of those things. That second piece is that empathy piece. This is somebody's family member, and I always tell them that you're not a cop first. You are somebody's son or daughter, and that's the simplest that I can make it. And when I take care of my first responders, I take care of them as if they were my own children, meaning I protect them. I guide them. Not everybody needs to know what's going on. It's on a need to know, basis, but not everybody needs to know. So I protect them in this like shell. And when you empathize with that, I can relate that someone that's struggling is could be my family member, right? And we always say, well, it's not important until it happens to us, but the truth is it's happening every single day. And sometimes your family members are struggling silently because they're scared to tell you, or they're scared that you won't understand, or you'll judge them. So that empathy piece is huge, because this could be someone dealing with a lifelong chronic illness that they just, can't get under control. Maybe they're using drugs and alcohol in addition to medicine. Maybe they're not taking their medicine appropriately. Or maybe this is one of those moments where something has happened and they're having a spiritual emergency, or they're having a crisis in life, and it's this moment right now and it's never happened before. That's a really scary place to be, right? So that empathy piece is you're not judging them, you're just listening, and you're trying to help and see what they need in that moment. And that right, and the listening piece, it's not trying to tell them what they need to do, or giving them direction. It's just listening to what they're telling you so you can better understand how they're seeing the situation, and maybe starting to understand that there are other things going on here, and being able to put together something that's a little more articulate when you do pass them along to someone else. And then lastly, this is the one that I can struggle with on my personal level, but when I'm with people, it's different. Patience is key. And it really is. I know we have a lot going on, and we have another call or two coming down, really quickly. But when you take that time and you don't rush the situation to try to move them along, they know that you care about them and their best interest. And we're trying to do less damage moving them forward, and not have this thing haunt them for the rest of their lives, right? It's a moment in time. So give them a minute, show them that you're with them, be empathetic, listen to what they're saying, have patience with them, and humble ourselves. And that's the help model. And I'm telling you, if you do this with your own family members who are going through something on any level, right? You don't want them beating themselves up years down the road because of how this was handled, or something replays in their mind. Just be a decent person. That's really, it boils down to that. Be a decent person and do to others as you would want them to do to you or your family members.
So well said, and we'll put the help model up when we show this. That was powerful. And again, thank you for that, because you keep taking complex topics and making them simple, which is what our service is. The second one you offered was the fear model, and that really, really touched me. And I'll just do my own personal example, and having talked to lived experience around the world, it was the fear that got in the way of appropriate care. And we just want to be able to have like almost the help model so that we can just have a little conversation, especially when it is a true spiritual emergency. Let's just have a little conversation, because this doesn't have to escalate. So you presented the fear model, and I think it speaks to families. It definitely speaks to live experience, and it then speaks to first responders and anybody in the health community. So if you want to briefly talk about, well, what gets in the way, and then how can we support it? Because we could save lots of pain and suffering, and also lots of money, sending people in places they shouldn't be. So
Yeah.
what's the fear model?
Yeah, and we can save lots of relationships as well. And this one is really it's about that, the fear of the blank, and the blank is the unknown. And I relate this to someone that I know that struggles with mental health issues, and it really is one of those things, until it's in your face or it's in your life, you don't see it for what it is. So let's just take the case of someone sitting on the street. And we see this a lot when I go to Walmart here. There's this young man that I met. His name is Neil, and he doesn't have mental health issues, but being on the street has caused him great deal of pain and suffering. But when people see him, they either feel sorry for him and want to give him money, or they just discount him as if he doesn't exist. And I'm like, there's something wrong with this picture, right? And so it's that idea that number one, the F is they're frightened. They're scared of what they don't know and they don't understand. And it reminds me of people online that want to go out and kill snakes, and they kill certain animals because they're scared. And I say, you don't have to kill everything because you're scared of it. You need to learn what it is and why you are scared, because it doesn't have a problem. In fact, it would still be here if you left it alone. The problem is that you have a problem with it. And instead of addressing why you internally have a problem with it, you want to put everything back on that.
Mm,
And
mm,
that's what we do with people like this as well, is we're frightened of how they're acting, they're behaving, what they're saying. It doesn't resonate with us and it's scary. So that immediately comes up with, I put this wall and I distance myself from them, or I want them out of my space. So call somebody to take them out. And that's literally how we operate. And the idea is when you can start to embrace what this means. So the idea of fear is we're frightened, number one. Number two, if you've been around this or you have someone who struggles with mental health, there may be an embarrassment factor, and nobody wants to say this, but it's true. I have taken out someone who had serious mental health issues. It didn't appear all the time, but when it did, it could put you in a really weird position when you're out eating dinner and they get up and they start doing things, in the restaurant, or they're doing stuff outside the restaurant before you go in and people are watching you. So there's an embarrassment factor because I'm worried about
mhm.
what people are going to think about me, right? It's again internal. It's an internal issue that I'm having right now based on what they're doing. That third one is that apprehension. It's constantly, do I take them out now? Can we go in public? Can we do this? Can I? It's this constant worry about the situation again, because how is it going to appear to me, right? And everyone around me. And then lastly is that resistant piece, is that, you don't, it's one of those things where you're just like resistant on helping them. And they're possibly resistant on receiving help. And there's this kind of back and forth piece. And it's really this component that's, it is what it is, but it's at the core of it, it's not healthy. It's not
Mm.
healthy for either party. So what I said was, instead of walking around being afraid, right, and being embarrassed, let's embrace what that fear is and what are we so scared of. And the truth is, we're scared of how we want to be perceived. And there's no control in this situation because that other person is kind of like this, it's an outlier that you don't have any control over what they're going to do or say, whereas you may be very controlled. And that's where this fear and embarrassment piece comes in, because now you're not sure what's going to happen. So that starts to heighten your own anxiety. So what do? Normally, you would keep that person away from you. You don't go around them. So you're breaking down that relationship piece because this is your love,
Mm.
your family member, a friend, right? Coworker. So we wanted to flip that fear model to where you embrace that fear. Whatever it is that you're scared of, I want you to sit with it for a minute and realize, why are you afraid of it at its core? Like, what is it about that that's causing you the problem? And then once you flip that script, what you're doing now is you're going, okay, I'm going to address this differently. Instead of being fearful and frightened, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to fellowship with this individual. I'm going to meet them where they are. And where they are, I may not like, but that's what it is, right? There's nothing illegal about having mental health issues or having, whatever. There's nothing illegal about that. So you're just embracing them where they are. And you can have boundaries with that, but it's just that piece of just keeping that relationship open and healthy as you can. That second piece is empowerment. Not only are you empowering yourself to embrace that fear and to kind of know what it is, you're empowering that other person to feel like they can be themselves around you and not have to feel like, embarrass themselves, or that they can't go out with you because they don't know how to act around you. That third one is from the apprehension, right? We are going to be more approachable. So, don't come in with a mindset that there's a problem here and you're going to fix it. There is no problem. Like they may have issues, but that's not your problem to fix. It's just the idea of just being approachable, that you can go up to somebody and ask them if they need something and actually have a
Yes.
conversation, and treat them like a human being. This young man that I met, I befriended him and he's just a wonderful person. I haven't seen him in a little bit, so I'm a little concerned, but I would go get things for him and I would give him some money and I said, is there anything that you need? And he would say like, yeah, I need a couple pair of pants or whatever. I'm cold at
Mm.
night. So, just listen to what they say And when you're approachable, they're more willing to be open and talk to you about things, but we've got to break down that wall. And then that last one is responsiveness. Maybe they need something from us that we can give. And when you're approachable and you have that wall broken down, they're more willing to, say, hey, maybe I need A, B, and C, or I just need this from you, or just for you to listen, right? So it's really kind of just grabbing that fear and turning it around and saying, listen, who cares what people think? Like seriously, who cares what other people think? Because they're gonna think what they want to anyway. And I always say, right, what other people think of you. This somebody else invented this. I don't know where it came from, but I always use it. It's what other people think of you is none of your business. Because they're going to make their own judgments anyway, because they're not with you the entire time. They might be walking into the restaurant when you're in there midway through your meal and they didn't see what happened the last 30 minutes, right? They're getting this one-time picture. So don't worry about other people. Worry about what you're dealing with in that moment with those people and make them feel loved and make them feel okay for being who they are. And that will get us further down the road than trying to judge and being fearful of the whole situation.
That was fabulous. And we actually have to come back to that at some point to really go into the detail of how you overviewed it. So, as a first responder, former first responder, and now, creating tools at that point, if we bring it back to mental health crisis, and even specifically, sometimes there are spiritual emergencies of which most people don't even know what's going on. So it's definitely a fear model. There's apprehension, there's embarrassment, there's what's going on. Some people will say, let's just get them in the hospital and get rid of them, right? But over the last 2 years, Dr. Olivia, we have spoken about, well, there are a few things first responders can do. And we need to make it simple because you can speak to it better than I. There's not a lot of time, but there's something that you're starting to share about the tactical pause, which I love. There is something called tactical pause, and it does fit with what I've been caring about, for a while. Just take a pause for a moment before we react to call 988 or before we react to say, get this person in the hospital. Um, how do you see your message about tactical pause applying when there is an emergency? And I'm almost going to say focus on the spiritual emergency. How does a first responder tactically pause to serve that person?
And I apologize for my dog barking.
Oh, I
Always
didn't hear
barking
it.
while it's
That's
been
all
happening
right.
10 times. So real quick, the tactical pause really is a conscious decision where there's space between the stimulus and the response. And what I want to put in there as a kind of a disclaimer is you're always making the scene safe first. You're not, sometimes you actually do pause when you go on scene, depending on what kind of scene it is. In fact, you may go on an emergency scene where there's not a physical threat, but maybe there's a car fire or something like that, right? And there's several people that need to be triaged. That tactical pause can save you time by looking at who needs to be seen first rather than running to the first person you find. So there's a tactical pause there, which means that you take a moment to sit with your thoughts, look around, being able to assess the scene very quickly, but not rashly. You're doing it very meticulously. You're giving yourself no more than maybe 15 to 30 seconds, which will go by very quickly, but you're really looking in that moment for this thing that needs to be addressed first. So how that can play in here is once the scene is safe and you arrive and there is no physical threat to anyone as far as weapons go, you're assessing the individual that needs to be seen. You're making note of the environment, what they're saying, you're just kind of sizing them up, so to speak, what they're wearing, how they're acting. And that's what the tactical pause does, is it keeps you from just jumping in right away and trying to do this whole rundown. I'm so officer so and so and I'm, whatever, and you just kind of calm the scene down slightly and you're picking up on what they're actually providing you even without saying anything. And you're taking that in, kind of just you're cataloging it, so to speak, so that when you do go to speak to them, you can kind of adjust how you're saying things to them so that they'll understand and you're calming the situation down a little bit. And it really just provides you time. It's not procrastinating, but it's really just slowing the scene down a little bit and gathering the pieces and being more controlling and mindful of what's happening.
So this is a great place to like close for a few bullet points. if we zeroed in on this thing that is either somewhat unknown, people are apprehensive about, people have spiritual or religious crisis, and we are trying to just make an awareness that that's not always psychosis, it's not always mental illness. So you arrive on a scene and somebody is speaking about Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, whatever religious reference they have. Let's talk about one, two, three things that we've been trying to say. Something about, are you aware that there's actually a religious spiritual issue in the DSM? Like, this is not always, a hospital call. Can we bring clergy on? And maybe back to the how can I help before we react too quickly. So if you were going to speak to first responders or even families when somebody is in this maybe awkward or odd religious moment, what would be one, two, or three things that we could do without burdening the first responder with time? Like, what can happen in that tactical pause? Yeah.
Well, if we're talking, let's talk about each of those a little bit separately. So let's talk families real quick. So families, first off is the biggest thing is to make sure that because they may not understand that this is a religious crisis or whatever that may be, right? They may be speaking about God or something else, and they may think that that's odd, depending on who they are and what they do normally, right? But the first thing I think is to make sure that the individual is safe physically, that they are not, that there's no fear that they have weapons or that they can harm themselves or anyone else. That's number one, because even in these moments, they may not be thinking clearly themselves and may not know what's happening. So that would be number one, is making sure that they're safe. And then, number two is, I think we've discussed this before as well, is, I've dealt with people. I've actually dealt with an individual who thought he was God. And
Yeah.
he said that he was, and these are the strange things, right? He believed that his mom did not exist, that he was born out of a spaceship and was delivered to the zoo for his birthday. And it's just those things, that was his reality. And you don't play into those if it's not legitimate. But when someone's talking about spirituality or religion, um, and maybe it may be completely doctrinally sound, right? Who are we to say that they can't talk about that, right? That's what they're going through right now. So I think part of it is when it becomes too much, there's a threshold that we'll tolerate. And when it becomes too much about God or Buddha or whatever they're talking about, then people go like, "Oh, wait a minute. This is a problem." And I'm like, "But why? Why is it a problem?" Right? Is it you think it's the whole it's the religiosity piece that we talked about. It's too much. And I'm like, we try to make determinations about what's normal and what's not normal, and that's not really our place to make that determination. It's being with that person and understanding what they're going through in that moment. Again, going back to that help model, right? Humble yourselves and listen to what they're telling you, right? Maybe make note of some of those things that they're telling you, and just letting them talk and being empathetic, listening to what they're saying and what they're not saying to kind of help move this through. Like when you get to a point where maybe there's more clarity for them, you can come back and ask some more questions as follow up. But just because it may be odd to you, I mean, unless you think that they've taken drugs or they've done something that could hurt themselves, there's, in some cases, there's no reason to call anybody else. You're just sitting with them and you're talking with them. And you're going to know when your family member that you're around all the time or that lives with you is doing something that's not in their normal, or they're acting odd. That would be something that you might want to reach out if it becomes a problem where they're completely out of character, and they're not acting right, they're not responding right. That's one thing. But we've got to kind of like sit back a little bit more and be uncomfortable for a little bit to understand what this is.
Again, it goes back to your help model. Can I humble myself and empathize and listen and have patience, have a little conversation? And we know first responders do not have all that much time. There are other models with Arrive Together and, places where there can be further, but literally if it's a shorter version and we might close on this, you were part of our conversation 2 years ago. What is it like if we have clergy? What is it like if we start hearing religiosity before we run them to the hospital, which might be necessary? Let's close with like why would we want to give the person an option to call a clergy or a chaplain?
Well,
Because first responders are not always prepared, but why would
right.
you want to do that as a beginning next step?
Well, for me, one of the things that I want to keep from happening is having this thing escalate into a bad place or to have them get upset. And I think when you can go to them and say, listen, would you like it if I called someone a member of the clergy? Do you have an active church that you attend? When you can just engage that, you're kind of disrupting their thought process. Number one, you're making them think a little bit. They're not just spouting things out. They're actually stopping for a minute. And they're actually using this as a tactical pause as well, because the truth is, now they have to go, wait a minute, they're engaging me on a different level here. And do I go to church? Do I have a pastor? Do I have, so they're thinking about that. And they may not, but the fact that you're asking those questions shows that you're engaged with them and that you're at least thinking on the same level. And that's where we want it. And maybe they say no, and maybe you go, listen, I have someone that we work with, and maybe it is or isn't possible, but maybe you work with someone that's in your agency that is a police chaplain or whatever, and you go, listen, I know maybe this person isn't of your religious background, but would you be willing to talk with them, or would that be okay if I brought them on scene just to give you a little piece? It's really that simple. And just making people feel comfortable, because this could be a really scary time for someone that hasn't had this happen before, and then being surrounded by police, and maybe that hasn't happened before, so it's all these unknowns, and they're really operating out of that fear model themselves because they don't know what's happening.
Yeah. Um, I so thank you that you are a spokesperson for this new initiative. I don't think we're too far away from including chaplains and clergy in that. We don't want to overburden first responders, but we want to have that tactical pause before we just react and drive somebody into a hospital without any support. So I want to thank you for this corporate conversation. We are now 2 years going on our third year into just making an awareness. I want to thank you for all your work, and we're going to see another conversation as we go forward.
Thank you, Janet. All right. Let me